For decades, the royal vault beneath the palace remained untouched, a silent guardian of secrets too dangerous to surface. But everything changed the moment archivists discovered a sealed ledger entry that had never been catalogued, never disclosed, never discussed. And next to the words, Sapphire Set Private Collection, one name appeared that no one expected: Princess Anne. That single entry shattered decades of silence and awakened a storm no one was prepared for. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The vault itself had long existed as a whispered institution within the palace, not merely a storage chamber for jewels, but a protected archive of legacy, discretion, and power. It housed pieces that were never paraded before the public, heirlooms deliberately separated from spectacle. Within those stone walls, history was curated with surgical precision. Some items symbolized triumph, others survival. But the Sapphire Set stood apart because it had never appeared anywhere. No official portrait, no state banquet, no ceremonial registry. It was as if it had been swallowed by time, intentionally removed from the royal narrative. That alone would have been unsettling. Yet the true rupture came with the sealed directive attached to its listing, a private notation bearing the unmistakable authority of the Queen Mother herself. It was not formatted like standard inventory documentation. It read more like a personal command, shielded from routine cataloguing and protected by an additional authorization seal that had not been broken in over 4 decades. And then there was the gap. 40 years of royal accounting, meticulously detailed and publicly cross-referenced, yet not a single official mention of the sapphires. Not during estate reorganizations, not during succession audits, not even during private valuations conducted in times of transition. The absence was too precise to be accidental. Archivists described the moment Princess Anne's name surfaced beside that hidden entry as chilling rather than celebratory. There was no announcement, no celebratory note of inheritance, just a stark alignment of her name with a collection that technically did not exist in public records. Early whispers moved quickly through administrative corridors, suggesting this was not a gift bestowed in affection, but a conditional transfer rooted in something deeper, something earned. The language surrounding the ledger implied responsibility rather than ownership. That distinction changed everything. Almost immediately, senior officials began quiet containment. Internal communications were restricted. Archive access was temporarily suspended. The discovery was labeled as procedural clarification, a phrase that did little to mask the tension simmering behind it. Because if Princess Anne had been entrusted with something erased from official history, it meant the Queen Mother had acted outside visible tradition. And when tradition is bypassed within a monarchy built upon it, consequences ripple far beyond gemstones. Staff members who had served decades described the atmosphere as strained, as though a carefully balanced narrative had cracked open. This was not about jewels. It was about trust, loyalty, and an unspoken hierarchy quietly challenged by ink on an aging page. And as speculation tightened its grip, one unsettling realization settled in. The Sapphire Set had not simply been forgotten, it had been deliberately concealed, its story suspended in silence until the moment Princess Anne's name forced it back into the light. But the deeper archivists dug into the vault's forgotten records, the clearer it became that this Sapphire Set wasn't merely hidden, it was deliberately erased from history. The Queen Mother was known for her elegance, but also for her strategic silence. Behind closed doors, she made decisions that reshaped the monarchy without ever raising her voice. So when a handwritten addendum surfaced alongside the Sapphire Ledger, bearing her private seal, it sent a chilling message through palace corridors. This wasn't a forgotten gift. It was a calculated act, one that had been waiting decades to surface. Those who served her often said she understood power better than anyone in the room, precisely because she rarely displayed it. While others argued policy or posture, she moved quietly, guiding outcomes through carefully timed influence rather than public declaration. Her authority was not loud. It was enduring. And that is why the addendum unsettled so many. It was not written in the rigid language of protocol, It carried a tone that felt personal yet resolute, referencing steadfast loyalty over sentiment, as though she was settling an argument that had never been publicly acknowledged. The phrasing suggested she had witnessed fractures within the family, tensions that required discernment rather than diplomacy. It hinted that, at some critical moment, she had weighed affection against allegiance and chosen the latter. The sapphires were described not as ornaments, but as symbols of sovereign endurance. That distinction shifted the narrative entirely. These were not jewels selected for glamour or ceremony. They were tokens of resilience, tied to the idea of carrying burdens without complaint. The Queen Mother had survived war, scandal, and seismic changes within the institution she protected. She understood what it meant to hold steady while others faltered. To label the Sapphire Set in such a way was to attach it to a philosophy, not a wardrobe. And buried within the directive was a clear indication that the set was never intended for public ceremonial use. No coronations, no state banquets, no carefully choreographed appearances. It was to remain unseen, safeguarded as a quiet testament to something far more important than spectacle. What unsettled insiders most was the fact that the directive bypassed conventional succession lines. It did not follow predictable hierarchy. It stepped around expectation and tradition with deliberate precision. During that era, private tensions among royal siblings had simmered beneath a polished exterior. Roles were rigid. Recognition was uneven. Public praise did not always mirror private contribution. The Queen Mother had observed these dynamics with the patience of someone who knew history would eventually judge them. Her note felt like a correction, subtle but unmistakable. It implied that legacy should not simply descend through rank, but align with character, and that possibility reframed everything. If the Sapphire Set was meant as a measure of endurance, a reward for unwavering loyalty rather than lineage, then it ceased to be an inheritance at all. It became a test, a silent evaluation conducted over years, perhaps decades, one that only someone who embodied discipline without complaint could pass. The idea alone would be enough to unsettle a family built on hierarchy. Because if one hidden directive could redefine worth behind closed doors, then the foundations of recognition within the monarchy were far more fragile than anyone admitted. And if the sapphires were never meant for public display, then the question becomes even more explosive: why did Princess Anne's name appear now? Princess Anne has always been the monarchy's quiet backbone, steady, unshaken, unyielding. She never chased headlines. She never courted favor. But what if that quiet discipline earned her something no one else could claim? When her name surfaced beside the Sapphire Set, insiders didn't call it favoritism. They called it recognition. And that distinction would ignite private tensions that had long been simmering beneath palace diplomacy. For decades, Anne built a reputation not through spectacle, but through stamina. While others navigated the glare of public fascination, she moved with consistent purpose, carrying out engagements with a reliability that bordered on relentless. There were no dramatic reinventions, no strategic rebranding, no desperate bids for affection. Just work. Uncompromising, methodical work. In moments when the family faced storm scandals that threatened credibility, crises that fractured unity, Anne's response was not emotional outburst or strategic retreat. It was presence. She stood firm. That steadiness became her signature, even when it came at personal cost. Her bond with the Queen Mother had always been described as uniquely grounded, not theatrical, not indulgent, grounded. The older matriarch recognized in Anne something familiar, a refusal to collapse under pressure. During periods when internal disagreements strained sibling relationships, Anne reportedly remained loyal to the institution itself, rather than any one faction within it. That distinction mattered. The Queen Mother valued endurance over applause, consistency over charm, and while others may have commanded headlines, Anne commanded trust. Yet that trust did not translate into glamour. She was often excluded from the flashier privileges that came with royal status. Grand tours, carefully curated narratives, ceremonial prominence, these tended to orbit around those perceived as future-facing symbols. Anne existed in the margins of spectacle, but never in the margins of responsibility. That contrast created a subtle tension within the ranks. Visibility carried its own currency, and those who possessed it often seemed more celebrated. But dedication, quiet and relentless, accumulated a different kind of value, one measured privately rather than publicly. During particularly turbulent family chapters, when loyalties were tested and reputations wavered, Anne's unwavering composure reportedly shifted something fundamental in the Queen Mother's perception. What began as admiration may have hardened into conviction. Palace insiders later described Anne as the guardian of continuity, a phrase that carried weight beyond flattery. It suggested she was seen not merely as a daughter or sibling, but as a stabilizing force when the ground felt uncertain. And stabilization is not glamorous. It is exhausting. It demands sacrifice without applause. That sacrifice left its mark. Anne rarely voiced frustration, yet those close to her hinted at the emotional weight she carried in silence. Watching others receive adoration while she absorbed responsibility required a resilience few understood. There is a particular loneliness in being dependable, in being expected to endure without faltering. If the Sapphire Set was indeed tied to steadfast loyalty rather than sentiment, then her name beside it did not signal favoritism. It signaled validation. But validation within a monarchy built on hierarchy is dangerous, because once recognition shifts from birthright to character, the balance of perception begins to tremble. And as whispers of that recognition spread, it became increasingly clear that the sapphires represented more than private gratitude. They were tied to something older, something rooted in symbolism that reached beyond individual relationships. Yet the sapphires themselves hold a deeper meaning, one that predates even Anne's quiet legacy. These weren't ordinary sapphires. Long before they disappeared into the vault, they were whispered about as symbols of endurance during Britain's darkest hours. Passed through wartime uncertainty and political upheaval, the Sapphire Set carried more than monetary value, it carried legacy. And that legacy was never meant to glitter under chandeliers. It was meant to be safeguarded by someone the Queen Mother believed could bear its weight. Rumours traced the origin of the sapphires back to a tense chapter of wartime diplomacy, when alliances were fragile and trust was currency more valuable than gold. The stones were said to have been acquired not as indulgence, but as a gesture of solidarity during a moment when the nation's stability felt uncertain. They were linked to private negotiations, to quiet reassurances exchanged behind closed doors, to promises that Britain would endure. In that context, the sapphires became something far greater than adornment. They symbolized survival under pressure. To possess them was to carry a reminder of resilience, forged in crisis. During years when the monarchy itself faced scrutiny and doubt, the sapphires reportedly remained locked away, untouched by ceremony. That decision was deliberate. The Queen Mother understood optics. She knew the difference between jewels that dazzled crowds and those that carried solemn memory. Public crowns represented authority visible to the world, but the Sapphire Set embodied loyalty tested in shadow. That contrast defined their power. They were never intended to compete with tiaras displayed beneath bright lights. They were meant to stand apart, a quiet testament to endurance that required no applause. Blue, the color of the stones, deepened their symbolism. Blue speaks of depth, constancy, calm, in the face of chaos. It evokes oceans that appear tranquil while concealing immense force beneath the surface. The Queen Mother reportedly believed that true strength resembled that same stillness, composed outwardly, immovable inwardly. If the sapphires represented that philosophy, then entrusting them to someone was not a decorative gesture. It was recognition of character. And recognition of character within a monarchy structured by rank carries dangerous implications. There were whispers that the set was worn only once, in a private family ceremony far from cameras and press speculation. No official photographs documented it. No public registry recorded the moment. Yet those present allegedly described the atmosphere as solemn, almost reverent. The sapphires were not celebrated, they were acknowledged. That distinction mattered. It suggested the jewels were linked, not to celebration, but to responsibility. A private affirmation of trust, rather than a public display of wealth. Over time, a theory gained quiet traction among palace observers. The Sapphire Set did not represent hierarchy at all. It represented moral authority, authority earned through steadfast loyalty, through remaining anchored when tides shifted unpredictably. If that theory holds weight, then the set's significance extends beyond lineage. It challenges assumptions about what truly sustains a monarchy. Is it birthright alone, or is it the character of those who refuse to waver when storms rage unseen? As the vault records resurfaced, and Princess Anne's name aligned with this deeply symbolic inheritance, the question grew sharper. If the sapphires were tied to endurance rather than status, then their re-emergence carried a message, one that reverberated through generations. But as whispers grew louder within palace walls, the silence from other senior royals became impossible to ignore. No official statement was released, no clarification was offered, but behind the palace gates, tension was unmistakable. Sources described emergency consultations, sealed meetings, and carefully measured conversations, because this wasn't just about jewels. It was about what they represented and who they symbolically elevated. The revelation didn't simply expose a hidden treasure, it disrupted an unspoken understanding within the royal hierarchy. Within hours of the vault record resurfacing, senior advisors reportedly convened in private chambers, poring over language that had not been examined in decades. The concern was immediate and layered. If Princess Anne's name was formally attached to a symbolic heirloom of this magnitude, what message did that send internally and publicly? Strategy discussions were not about gemstones, they were about perception. The monarchy survives on continuity, on carefully maintained narratives that reinforce stability. Any suggestion that recognition had quietly shifted away from predictable lines of succession risked unsettling that balance. There was anxiety about how the public might interpret the discovery. Would it appear as favoritism, as a silent correction of past decisions, or worse, as an indictment of those who had enjoyed greater visibility, but perhaps less endurance? Even without an official announcement, leaks have a way of breathing on their own. Palace aides were instructed to avoid speculation, to offer neutral responses if pressed. Silence became the chosen defense, but silence, in moments like this, can be louder than proclamation. Beneath the institutional caution, deeper currents stirred. Generational divides within the monarchy have always existed, though rarely acknowledged openly. Older figures tend to value steadfast loyalty, quiet sacrifice, and duty performed without expectation of reward. Younger members often operate in a world shaped by media presence and public engagement, where visibility itself is currency. The Sapphire Set, with its emphasis on private endurance, seemed to align with one philosophy over another. That alignment did not go unnoticed. It raised uncomfortable questions about what the Queen Mother had truly valued and whether those values still defined the institution. Among siblings, emotional undercurrents reportedly resurfaced, not confrontations, not open disputes, but subtle recalculations. Recognition, even symbolic recognition, carries weight in a family built upon hierarchy. If one member was privately affirmed as the embodiment of sovereign endurance, what did that imply about the others? Where, decades of public prominence, suddenly reframed. The mere possibility created strain. Respect and rivalry can coexist in royal bloodlines, but when symbolism shifts, so too does the delicate equilibrium that holds relationships together. Advisors feared a narrative spiral. If the Sapphire Set story reached wider audiences without context, it could be interpreted as a quiet rebuke or a hidden endorsement. Either interpretation threatened to complicate carefully managed images. The monarchy's strength lies in its appearance of unity. Anything that hints at internal recalibration invites scrutiny. And scrutiny, once awakened, rarely retreats quietly. Yet beneath all the strategic caution and political sensitivity, one unsettling realization began to surface. The controversy was not ultimately about who was entrusted with the sapphires. It was about why they were entrusted at all, and under what terms. Because buried within that aged ledger was language that transformed the entire narrative from inheritance to obligation. And as advisors continued to review the Queen Mother's precise wording, they understood the true tremor had yet to be felt. Yet the most startling twist wasn't who received the sapphires, it was the condition quietly attached to them. Buried beneath the inventory listing was a clause so subtle it almost went unnoticed, a stipulation written in the Queen Mother's own hand. The Sapphire Set, it declared, was not to be publicly displayed unless the bearer remains unshaken in service. It wasn't a gift, it was a vow, and if Princess Anne's name appeared beside it, it meant she had already fulfilled something far greater than inheritance. The wording was precise, almost surgical, in its restraint. Unshaken in service, not celebrated, not admired, unshaken. The distinction carried weight. It implied endurance under strain, composure in adversity, loyalty that does not fracture when tested. Palace legal historians who quietly reviewed the document understood immediately that this was no ceremonial flourish. In traditional royal transfers, heirlooms pass through lineage with little ambiguity, but this clause altered the foundation. It attached behavior to possession. It tethered legacy to conduct. And in doing so, it introduced a startling possibility that the sapphires were not permanently bestowed at all, because if service could be measured, it could also be judged. And if it could be judged, it could be found wanting. The implication was clear: the Sapphire Set could be revoked. Not through public scandal, not through political upheaval, but through a failure to remain steadfast. That single condition transformed the jewels from symbols of favor into instruments of accountability. They were no longer markers of status, they were silent witnesses to consistency. There was also a coded reference embedded within the addendum, a phrase historians interpreted as steadfast guardianship. It was language the Queen Mother had used before in private correspondence, typically when describing individuals she believed embodied continuity. Guardianship suggests protection, vigilance, a willingness to absorb strain so that others remain undisturbed. To attach such a concept to the Sapphire Set was to declare that whoever bore it was entrusted with something intangible. Not authority, not power, but moral steadiness. The emotional burden of such a condition cannot be overstated. To carry an heirloom is one thing. To carry a legacy that can be withdrawn is another entirely. It means every action, every public response, every private decision becomes part of an unspoken evaluation. If Princess Anne's name was aligned with this clause, then her decades of unwavering duty were not just admirable, they were essential. The Queen Mother, known for rewarding resilience rather than theatrics, had effectively constructed a private covenant, one that acknowledged sacrifice, not through applause, but through trust. This reframes the entire narrative. The Sapphire Set was never about preference, it was about proof. Proof that endurance matters more than prominence. Proof that loyalty can outweigh lineage, and proof that within a monarchy often perceived as rigidly hierarchical, there existed a quiet mechanism for recognizing character. That mechanism was subtle, shielded by silence, protected by decades of obscurity. But once exposed, it reshaped perception entirely. Because if one heirloom was conditioned on service rather than succession, what does that reveal about the Queen Mother's deeper philosophy? It suggests she believed the monarchy's survival depended less on titles and more on temperament, less on spectacle and more on stability. That belief, preserved in ink and secrecy, now stands as a challenge to every assumption about royal inheritance. The revelation does not simply elevate Princess Anne, it elevates the concept of steadfast duty itself. And in that shift lies the true disruption. The sapphires are no longer jewels locked in stone walls. They are a benchmark, a measure, a quiet reminder that within the most rigid institutions, loyalty is not merely expected, it is examined. And suddenly, the hidden sapphires began to look less like treasure and more like testimony. What happens when a secret meant for one generation resurfaces in another? The Sapphire Set wasn't simply Anne's story, it was a message to the monarchy's future, a reminder that legacy is earned, not inherited. As younger royals quietly observed the unfolding revelation, a new question began to form. Was this the Queen Mother's final lesson, delivered decades after her passing? The discovery did more than stir archival curiosity, it shifted perception. For years, royal merit had been measured publicly through visibility, popularity, and ceremonial prominence. Yet the re-emergence of the Sapphire Set reframed that metric entirely. It suggested that the truest measure of worth had been recorded in private, all along: endurance without applause, service without spotlight. That realization rippled outward, especially among the younger generation navigating a monarchy shaped as much by media as by tradition. They grew up in an era where relevance demands constant presence, where public approval is quantified and analyzed. Yet here was a hidden inheritance that rewarded the opposite. It elevated restraint over exposure, loyalty over charisma. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Some reportedly viewed the revelation as inspiring, proof that steadfast dedication still held meaning within an evolving institution. Others felt the quiet pressure of comparison. If the Queen Mother had valued silent resilience above all, how would that standard apply in a world that rarely celebrates silence? The psychological weight of symbolic heirlooms began to settle heavily. The Sapphire Set was no longer confined to Princess Anne's name. It became a benchmark hovering over the family's future. Heirlooms in royal history often represent continuity, but this one represented evaluation. It implied that history itself keeps score, that the monarchy, despite its rigid structures, contains hidden channels through which character is acknowledged. For younger royals building their identities in real time, the message was unmistakable. Substance endures beyond spectacle. This subtle recalibration carried potential ripple effects across internal alliances. Loyalty is not merely a virtue in royal life, it is currency. When one member is symbolically affirmed as the embodiment of endurance, dynamics inevitably shift. Conversations once rooted in protocol began to absorb a new undertone, one shaped by legacy rather than position. The evolving role of Princess Anne grew clearer in this context. She was no longer just the steadfast figure in the background. She was, in many ways, the living proof of the Queen Mother's philosophy. And yet, the revelation also raised unsettling possibilities. If the Sapphire Set was preserved as a lesson, what other private directives lay dormant within the vault? What other symbolic decisions were waiting for rediscovery? The monarchy thrives on continuity, but continuity can conceal recalibrations that only time reveals. This moment felt less like closure and more like the opening of a door long sealed, because if legacy is indeed earned rather than inherited, then the future of the monarchy may depend not solely on titles, but on temperament, not merely on birthright, but on endurance under pressure. The Sapphire Set has already redefined how one generation views recognition. The next revelation may go further still, but the final revelation would redefine everything the palace thought it understood about that vault. The Queen Mother never intended the Sapphire Set to dazzle the world. It was never meant for coronations, galas, or headlines. It was meant as proof that strength doesn't need spectacle. And perhaps that's why it remained buried for decades. Because once the world knew Princess Anne's name was etched beside it, the monarchy would be forced to confront a truth it had long avoided. Loyalty is the rarest jewel of all. Secrecy, in this case, was not concealment born of shame. It was preservation, born of conviction. The Queen Mother understood that influence is most powerful when it moves unseen. She had navigated crises that threatened to fracture the institution entirely, and she emerged not by demanding recognition, but by embodying steadiness. The Sapphire Set became an extension of that philosophy. It was hidden because its value would have been diluted by display. Spectacle invites applause. Silence demands reflection. By locking the sapphires away, she ensured that their meaning would remain intact, untouched by fashion, untouched by the fleeting judgments of public opinion. Princess Anne, in many ways, became the living embodiment of that restraint. Her career was not built on dazzling moments, but on relentless consistency. She absorbed criticism without retaliation. She endured personal and institutional storms without retreat. While others navigated waves of popularity and controversy, she maintained a straight course. That is not glamorous work. It is heavy, often lonely work. And yet, it is precisely the kind of endurance the Queen Mother revered. The alignment between the hidden philosophy of the Sapphire Set and Anne's quiet discipline feels less accidental and more inevitable. Within palace leadership, the rediscovery triggery, DA reckoning that could not be easily dismissed. Advisors accustomed to managing optics now faced a deeper question. What truly sustains the monarchy? Public approval fluctuates. Headlines fade. Even ceremonial grandeur loses its luster over time. But loyalty unwavering, consistent loyalty builds foundations that withstand pressure. The Sapphire Set, once seen as an obscure heirloom, now stood as a moral inheritance. It was not about adornment, it was about affirmation. Public curiosity, once ignited, became impossible to contain. Even without official statements, the narrative took on a life of its own. Observers began to reconsider decades of royal dynamics through a new lens. Recognition, it seemed, had always operated on two levels, the visible and the concealed. The visible celebrated prominence. The sapphires belonged to the latter, and that distinction reshaped the conversation entirely. What makes this revelation so powerful is not the sparkle of gemstones, but the quiet challenge they pose. If loyalty is the rarest jewel, then the monarchy's future depends not solely on lineage, but on character. The Queen Mother's invisible hand, reaching forward through time, has redefined how legacy can be measured. It suggests that history's true endorsements are often written in private, waiting for the right moment to surface. And still, the vault remains. Stone walls guarding artifacts whose meanings may not yet be fully understood. The Sapphire Set was one chapter, a profound one, but unlikely to be the last. Secrets preserved in silence have a way of resurfacing when least expected, reshaping narratives long considered settled. The monarchy stands at a crossroads shaped not by glittering crowns, but by the quiet endurance of those who carry its weight without complaint. And if one forgotten ledger entry could awaken this Saint Orm, the question that lingers in the shadows is simple: what other secrets are still waiting beneath the palace floor? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.